Well, thank you for joining me tonight. We're talking about law and grace. It's the seventh in our series on present truth and Deuteronomy. We talk a lot about law and grace, but I think there's a missing element here. Or, well, let's say to the end and you'll find out what I'm talking about. Law and grace. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died in vain. Why did Christ die in vain if righteousness comes through the law? Because he died to satisfy the demands of the law and gave us through grace. That's what charis in Greek. Grace is a gift. It is something which we do not deserve. And so, if we could have righteousness through the law, then why would Christ have to die? But we can't. So that's what he's talking about in Galatians, and it's interesting because it does have a relationship to our main interest, our main center this quarter, which is Deuteronomy. Now it talks about the law in heaven, and it says, this is the Ezekiel 28 passage, which is talking about Lucifer. Lucifer, of course, the name Lucifer means light bearer. And of course, he's the one who became Satan. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. Now that's the translation, the New King James Version. But the New American Standard and some others have this type of a translation. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. So there's an interesting contrast here. I wonder if you spotted it. In the first translation, he was perfect until iniquity was found. These words signify the presence of something, perfection and iniquity. And the second translation says blameless and unrighteousness. And these words signify the absence of something, the absence of blame and the absence of righteousness. And I'm going to say that I prefer the second translation for the simple reason that when we talk about negatives, we're in sin and so forth, we're talking about negation, something that is missing. What happened when Lucifer deceived a third of the angels was that he took away something that had been there before. Somehow this void opened up in his own life, and he then transferred it to others. You see, sin is primarily the absence of something, not the presence of something. Now, absences can gain a kind of power of their own, just like a black hole. Nothing can escape from it. What is the something of which sin is the absence primarily? And I'm going to suggest that the absence of trust and faith. Romans 14:12-23 tells us whatever is not from faith is sin. This tells me that I can keep everything in the law. I mean, supposing I could keep everything in the law, but even if I did, it would not be righteousness. Because if it doesn't come from faith, if it doesn't come from the fact that I trust God and believe in him, it comes from my own merits or my own efforts, then it isn't righteousness, it's sin. Now that's kind of hard to get used to because we think that keeping the law and doing all the right things would be righteousness, but that's not what Romans tells us. And Hebrews says, without faith, it is impossible to please God, to please him. So this is this reinforcement of this, that whatever this faith is, and that's what was missing, that's what was removed in heaven, is that Lucifer lost faith in God. And rather than try and reestablish trust, he spread that doubt and that suspicion, because we'll get there. That's the replacement for faith. Romans 1:1, which is actually quoting an Old Testament passage, says, the righteous man shall live by faith. The Old Testament affirms as well that it's not about legalism, although the law is there. We'll see why and what relationship the two have to each other. But there's a radical difference between righteousness by faith, and righteousness is by law. The law is necessary. We'll see why, what relationship it has. Therefore, having been justified by faith. Now, justified is a legal term in Paul's day that means we're declared not guilty. By faith, not by our works, we have peace with God, meaning that when we accept Jesus Christ's work as our own, we accept his salvation as our own by trusting that he has done so, then we're justified. We're declared not guilty. For by grace you have been saved through faith. So grace is the gift, and we have law and grace we're talking about tonight. Grace is the gift that you are given, and you receive it through faith. And that, not of yourselves. Even the faith is not something that we can gin up, but it is the gift of God. God gives us, to every man is given a measure of faith. The Bible tells us. And finally, in 2 Corinthians, we walk by faith, not by sight. This is so crucial to our lives, because if we're walking only by sight, many times we won't be able to walk at all. We won't be able to understand what is happening in our lives. The story of Job and others tell us this, that terrible things can happen, and we may not comprehend what's going on, but we can persevere through faith. Not through what we see. What we see will oftentimes be contradictory. In a world that's broken, in a world that's full of sin, what we see will often be the opposite of what we think we ought to see. And that's when we have to have faith. And that need for faith will never be removed. Now, with this faith is being talked about in the Bible, Oswald Chambers puts it this way: faith is absolute trust in God, trust that could never imagine that he would forsake us. That's pretty amazing. That's absolute trust. And of course, we talked about it before. There have been people, there's never been a person except Jesus Christ who's perfect in his performance. But there have been believers who have been perfect in their trust. That is, when time and eternity are on the line, they trust God, even unto death, as Revelation tells us. So that's it. Another quotation, almost identical, really, two different people writing at two different times. Faith is trusting God, believing that he loves us and knows best what is for our good. E.G. White. So this faith that is saving, this faith that is important, this faith that is necessary to please God is trust. Now, I know I stress this a lot because I think it's absolutely crucial. That's what was broken in the garden, is that the serpent said, did God say this? And look, I've eaten of the tree and I'm alive. And so he's saying, don't trust God. You can't trust God. And that's the lie that we fell for, that we could trust the serpent rather than trusting God. And now we live in a world that's full of distrust and suspicion. So blameless and unrighteousness, there was no blame attached, but there was until unrighteousness, this gap, this emptiness, this void that was found in Satan. Sin is primarily the absence. It's the absence of trust, which leaves a void to be filled by doubt and suspicion. And we know that when you start sowing suspicion among people, you destroy their relationships. You know, the great play Othello by William Shakespeare is where one man tricks another man into thinking his wife has been unfaithful. It's all about telling him he cannot trust his wife. It's a terrible, evil play in many ways. The character Iago, who tricks Othello, is a very evil villain. But this is almost a parable of what's happened in the universe. Is that we have been told that we cannot trust God. We've lost that trust, and what God has been trying to do ever since then is to reestablish trust. That's what he wants. That's why without trust, without our trusting him, it is impossible to please him. And anything that is done because we want to avoid punishment, or because we want to pile up merit, or because we want to get, as someone said, get on the right side of God. Any of those things, they're not righteousness. Anything that does not come from trust is sin. Even what we think of as our more virtuous acts are merely sin if they do not come from trusting God. Now, the law in Deuteronomy: if you obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that are written in this book of the law, and turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. This is what he's asking to do in Deuteronomy. This is Deuteronomy 30. This is toward the end. But he's saying, you want to move into this land. They've not done this. They were, before the 40 years of wandering, they were slaves for generations. They didn't know anything but slavery. Then they have not, the next generation, because the one died off because they refused to trust God and take the land of promise as it was offered to them. They didn't know anything. They didn't know how to trust God. They'd wandered through the wilderness. Now God had provided manna for them and had provided water for them in the desert. He provided everything as he does for us, although we're not wandering the wilderness. But it's easy for us, and it was easy for them to lose sight of that. And he's saying, now that you're going to move into a new kind of life, you're going to do the conquest of the land of Canaan, and then you're going to settle down. You're going to raise your crops and raise your families and raise your flocks. And you're going to have the opportunity to live a peaceful and prosperous life. But the only way that'll maintain is if you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. Because if you don't do that, then you will pursue your own ends. And eventually, because if you don't learn to trust God and trust each other, society will break down. And even if you don't fall into rebellion and fighting each other, which they did quite a bit, without trust in your society, you'll weaken your society and you'll be susceptible to conquest by others. And it's important that you do this. So that's what he's telling them. When you move into the land, this is what you want to do. You want to obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that he's written down for you in this book of the law, Deuteronomy, and then turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. Trust him with everything. It's easy to say, not so easy to do. And there we are. Turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Trust him absolutely. That's why we obey God. Remember, we had that quotation that our faith is trusting God, believing that he loves us and knows best what is for our good. That's why we do what he asks us to, because we trust him. We believe that he loves us and that what he's asking us to do is for our good. That is, again, anything without faith is sin. Anything that's not of faith is sin. And that's tough to get over. That's tough to get through. So he's saying, if you're going to move into this land and take possession of the land, it's up to you. Trust him absolutely. And we went through this earlier when we showed the similarity between this and the Micah text. We had showed the old man what is good. What does the Lord require of you? Well, here's the same thing, but in a slightly different form and 500 years earlier. And now, Israel, what does the Lord of your God ask of you? Now, again, many of the ancient gods, they were heartless, and they asked for the sacrifice of children, and they could be whimsical, they could, capricious, and they could suddenly turn and want everything you had. Whereas what does this God want from you? To fear him. This is not to be afraid of him, although there's a sense of it, because to fear the Lord your God is to be in awe of him. If you've ever stood Oh, Niagara Falls. If you've ever stood at the base of a huge mountain, you've ever seen some of these amazing works of God in nature, and you feel awe. And there is a tinge of fear in the sense that these things are bigger than you can even imagine, bigger than you can deal with. You see how small you are. So that's what God, He wants you to recognize who He is. And when we do that, we experience this sense of awe, which to the ancient mind can easily be fear. To walk in obedience to Him. Again, we trust Him that He knows what is best for us and He wants our good. And so we walk in obedience, again, because we trust Him. And here it comes, to love Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's decrees, commands, and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. See, this is what is going on here. Now, Letav Lach is interesting. Clifford Goldstein, of course, as someone who was born in a Jewish family, Letav Lach would have learned these, and it is for your own good. That's what it means. But notice now, Israel, what does the Lord ask of you, but for your own good? In other words, you can take all of these words in the middle, and you can boil this entire thing down to this. All of these things that God is asking of you, He's not asking of you in order to prove something about Him or about you. He's asking you to do these because it is for your own good. Now, I know this is not easy to even conceptualize fully, because I certainly have trouble. I don't get it all the time. I'm far from someone who could say, oh, I know what this is. I've got this down. It doesn't work that way. But I'm learning. And this is the whole point, that to walk, and both in the Old Testament and New Testament, the journey with God is a walk. Discipleship in the New Testament is walking. Follow me. And walking implies a process of growth, that you move from one step to the other. And this is the way, as a teacher, I can tell you, this is the way children grow up and how they learn. And this is the way adults do as well. This is the whole point here. He's giving us the opportunity to walk with Him. Jesus becomes more explicit in the New Testament, but it's clear here. He wants us to walk with Him in obedience to Him for our own good. For our own good. Now, I tell this story because it's absolutely true. I was at the Mount Agua in Guatemala. It's near Antigua. On one side is the volcano Agua, and the other side is the volcano Fuego. Agua is water, and Fuego is fire. So there's these two giant mountains, volcanic mountains, fire and water on each side of the lake. And we were there, and one of the persons who worked at the mission there said, I'll guide you to the roof, to the peak. You can go all the way to the peak of Agua, and it's 13,000 feet. It's a respectable climb. But when you get up, he said, within the last 300 feet or so, it's all a cinder cone. That's it wasn't an active volcano. It wasn't active at the time, but it wasn't extinct either. It was dormant. And so he said, I'll be your guide. And that was great. And when we got going on the trip, at the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, we met the small village at the foot of Agua. And he said, I can't go with you. Something's come up and I can't go, but there's the trail. He pointed us to the trail. He said, just follow this trail all the way, and you'll eventually, when you get to the cinder cone, you'll know it, and you just walk to the top. And so we were young and energetic, and seemed, what could possibly go wrong. And we had some water with us and some other things. So we started out on this trail, and for a couple of hours, everything went fine. The trail was about 1 lane wide for an automobile. It wasn't any wider than that. You wouldn't want to take a bus up there, but you could probably, And so for walking, no problem at all. It was a beautiful place, beautiful morning. They call Guatemala the land of eternal spring because it's often 72 degrees. It was beautiful. But after a couple of hours, we came to a place where there had been a landslide from above, and it had taken away the trail. The trail was along the edge of the mountain, and you had this trail, and suddenly there was a clear indication where the fall had been, and it had come through, and it simply had taken out that portion. Probably 50 feet, maybe longer. There was no way because the landslide had basically exposed bedrock, and it was smooth, and it was a long ways down. So there was no way that we could climb over that and get to the next part of the trail. So here we are. We're young. It's still the morning. Well, we'll pick our own way up the trail. So we found a waterway. These tall mountains. Whenever it rains, any significance, it leaves waterways. So we thought, well, we'll follow that. That'll be the way to go. And we kept on that until about 1 p.m. And then it became clear we just weren't going to make it. And so some had left earlier. I left at 1 o'clock. I'm told the others went on for an hour or two, didn't reach the top. Anyway, we all thankfully sort of came one by one into the little village at the bottom of the trail, none of us having made it. And here's the point: is that you need a guide. You need someone. It's when you are going to an unfamiliar place, it's a comfort. It's a safeguard to walk with someone. It isn't that you're a child and you're immature and you need that, but although in these matters we are in so many ways, it's just that when you're in a situation which is beyond your experience, beyond your ability, you need someone to walk with. And this is the whole point: walk in obedience to God. He's laid out the trail, if you will, in these laws and these decrees, and he wants us to love him, and then he walks with us. Now, Holy Spirit isn't mentioned here, but it is in the New Testament, and that sense of being within God's will is one that helps us to move forward in this. And of course, there were many indications that God spoke to Moses as man speaks to his friend, we're told. So there were those who understood. They recognized the presence of God in their walk. And that's what God wants for us, to make this walk, this progress, this movement forward. We can only do it if we trust him. So this is not arbitrary. It's not a list of commands to see if we're good enough. It's not a list of obstacles that we have to overcome, although we do have to overcome sin, and so we need his help to do that. But it's just that, it requires some effort on our part. But it's not about that. It's not about, testing us or putting us through something. It's about, this is the way we have to move forward. And so, now here's the thing. The lesson talks about a slave in Egypt. And I said that law and grace, we talk about that a lot, but we sometimes, I think, get it a little bit wrong. In fact, I think the title is a little bit wrong. Even though I was privileged to take a wonderful class in seminary called Law, Grace, and Freedom, which is an interesting combination. And of course, that's the whole point, is that laws, although we may not see it, laws make us free. Well, you don't think so? I recognize that when you come to a stop sign as you're driving along, and or to a traffic zone, and the other person has a red light, they'll stop. That makes you free to drive. It's much safer to drive. When you're in a country where people ignore the traffic signals, it becomes much more hazardous to drive. And so having these rules and having these regulations and so forth are ways of freeing up traffic, for example. So the good laws help to maintain our freedom. But notice this. This is not from Exodus 20, although it could be. Exodus 20 says almost word for word the same thing. This is from Deuteronomy 5, where God has Moses repeat the Ten Commandments. And in both cases, in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy 5, they begin with not with "you shall have no other gods before me," but with "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Now we can talk about this as being in the form of an ancient treaty, which it is, but a treaty in the ancient days was made between a king and a lesser king. But this is made between the God of the universe and everyone who follows him, all the Israelites, every individual one. But the point is here, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." This was a gift to them. Many peoples in the ancient world were enslaved. In fact, they stayed enslaved until they were extinct. Later on, when the northern kingdom of Israel is taken away into captivity, which is a form of slavery, they're never heard from again. We talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Well, they were lost into slavery. And so this is a kind of resurrection for the children of Israel. But it's grace. God did this before he asks anything of them, before he lays out any laws, or he asks for obedience or does any of these things. He delivers them. And so grace always comes before law. God's gift to us, his free gift, his provision for us, precedes any requirements that he puts on us. And that's here it is, bringing them out of Egypt. This is simply an act of grace. Didn't call it that in the Old Testament, but that's what it was. It was grace. And then "you shall have no other gods before me," and goes through what we know as the Ten Commandments. There's slight changes in Deuteronomy from Exodus 20, but the principles remain the same. The application is slightly different. But grace comes before law. And then after that, because we cannot keep the law, Jesus died for us, and grace comes again. So really, what we're talking about here is not law and grace, but grace, law, and grace. Paul says that where sin abounded, grace abounded more. We have an example right here. I suspect when Paul spent those 3 years in the desert trying to make sense out of everything that he had learned at the feet of Gamaliel, and then how that matched, because he come to the wrong conclusions. He was actually persecuting Christians. And then he met Christ on the road to Damascus, and he realized that everything he thought before was wrong. That's heavy. That's tough. How do you deal with that? And that was the point. Everything he'd learned was wrong. It was a mistake. And so he had to square up what he already knew with what he had just recently learned. And he began, I believe, because we see these things in Romans and other places, he began to understand this is what was actually taking place all along from the beginning. Grace, law, and grace. So where sin abounds, which is this earth, grace abounds more. And he says, does that mean I should sin more so there'd be more grace? No, no need for that. The point is that grace was pouring from the Father before we were even aware that we were sinners. It's a marvelous thing, really. So next time you hear grace, law, and grace, I hope you think, should be grace and law, and then more grace. Grace, law, and grace. And here it is. Not for your righteousness. Understand then, it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. the people that he has already delivered. He just got through telling, we just got through reading that part about how he had brought them out of the land of Egypt. Did he bring them out of the land of Egypt because they were ready for sainthood? No. In fact, they showed it by rebelling all along the way. They showed it when they refused to enter the land, refused to trust him and take the land, and 40 years later. So he's saying you didn't deserve this, but it's not about your bad people. It's about grace. You're getting this because it's a free gift. And that is so important. Until one understands that, I think I did this recently, but I'm going to do it again because it's so crucial for that to understand. And that is, it doesn't matter what I have. If I have something in my hand and I say, well, here, I've got something which I can use here. So this is a little, camcorder thing. All right. Now, so let's take this camcorder and understand this belongs to me. I can throw it away. I can pound it with a hammer and destroy it. I can keep it. I can give it to one of my children or whatever. Until you recognize that, you can never receive it as a gift. You never receive it. If you think I owe it to you and I give it to you, then you say, well, you just gave me what you owed me. That was no gift. That was paying a debt. I was entitled to that. And so we have to understand that to receive grace, and again, charis is a gift in Greek. To receive any kind of a gift, we have to realize that we don't deserve it, that it is purely out of the goodness of the heart of the person, the being with God, who gives it to us. That makes it a gift. And when we think we deserve it anyway, when we have entitlement, we'll never receive it as a gift. And we will always feel that we're not getting what's due us. It's a sad thing. And so that's why he's telling us, it's not for your righteousness. It's not because you're bad people. Don't misunderstand. It's because I love you. I made a promise. This is throughout Deuteronomy. I made a promise to Abram. I made a promise to your fathers. And remember, he renewed the promise to them. He said, I made a promise because I love you. And because of that, I'm bringing you to this land. I want you to see and understand and receive my love. But again, if it's owed, then there's no receiving love. It's just receiving land. Well, thanks. We needed that. So, again, I hope that next time you hear this, you think not of law and grace, but of grace, law, and more grace, because I think that's what is here. And that is clear even in Deuteronomy, second law. It's full of laws, but it's also full of love me, love the Lord your God. It's full of I love you. It's full of grace. And so Deuteronomy is saying, yes, I have these laws, these commandments, these regulations, but because I want you to be able to keep the gift I'm giving you. I want you to, one, be able to receive it as a gift, okay? And two, I want you to be able to maintain it, to keep it. Because, if I give you the camcorder or anything else, you decide to break it yourself, you're without it. You don't have the gift anymore. And that's what he's telling. That's what Deuteronomy is all about. I'm giving you this gift because I love you. Please, here's how to keep it. And he won't force us to do it. But he will give us the opportunity and give us the power if we trust in him. Well, thank you for being with us. I'll say again, if you want to support us, we really would appreciate it. Praying for us. Click on like. Every time you click on like, it tells YouTube that other people may like it, and they are more likely to recommend it to other people. So that really helps us. It costs you nothing except the energy to find the little thumbs up sign and click on it. If you share it, that helps too. It exposes it to more people. They have a chance to do it. If you subscribe, you will know all the time as soon as these are available. You can comment. Comments which are to the point and civil will be welcomed and eagerly anticipated. And but we want everyone to behave and everyone to have a good time. And if you wish to support this on a regular basis financially, become a patron. That's at patreon.com Bible Journeys /Bible Journeys, and you can become a patron. And you can always reach me at BibleJourneys@yahoo.com. Thank you for being with me this week, and I hope that God blesses you on your journey and you experience more grace, more guidance from the law, and yet more grace on top of that. Until next week, then.